Oh yeah, it's back. It's Cinemassacre's Monster Madness! Last October, we explored the history of horror films, but now we're going Daikaiju style. Daikaiju is the Japanese term for giant monster and is used when referring to an entire genre of giant monster movies like Gamera, War of the Gargantuous, and a shit ton of others. But the one we're going to talk about is Godzilla. He starred in 28 films. There's no doubt that he's the ultimate king of the monsters. He was originally a bad guy, destroying Tokyo and other cities in Japan, but then he became a hero, saving the world from evil monsters and alien invaders, including Ghidorah, Gigan, and Mechagodzilla. He's been a father and an environmentalist. He's been the subject of comic books, animated cartoons, tons of action figures, a song by Blue Oyster Cult, and video games, including many tournament fighters such as Destroy All Monsters Melee and recently Godzilla Unleashed. So what we're going to do is go through the whole 50-year history of Godzilla from 1954 to 2004 and see how this mega movie monster evolved as time passed. Why Godzilla? I don't know, it's just something I wanted to do for a long time. Monsters, Halloween, it's close enough, it should be fun. But there'll also be 2 nerd videos like usual, and 1 or more horror movie reviews on Spike.com. And closer to Halloween, I'll be posting some old videos you gotta see, so there's a ton of shit coming up. But anyway, Godzilla-Thon starts September 15th, 29 Godzilla reviews, including that one. So check it out. It's the return of Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. It was in 1954, just less than a decade after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. The first Godzilla film was very serious in tone, and Godzilla himself was a symbol of nuclear destruction. After all, this is a movie made by people who actually experienced such a threat firsthand. The suggested origin of Godzilla is that he was created from nuclear radiation. His species has been debated for years, but most agree that he is a cross between a Tyrannosaurus rex and a Stegosaurus because of the dorsal spines on his back. As for the name, in Japan he's called Gojira, which is a combination of the Japanese words gorilla and whale. Gorilla and whale, huh? Well, that's kind of different than a T-Rex and Stegosaur. Well, what were they, tripping on acid? But no, the real reason he got his name was because there was a big tough guy working at the studio and his nickname was Gojira. So producer Tomoyuki Tanaki decided to use the name. So how would you feel if a giant fire-breathing monster was named after you? I don't know, but I think it'd be pretty awesome. Now, it's probably no mystery that this monster is a guy in a rubber suit, but what most people don't know is how horrible and infamous it was to be the guy inside. First of all, you couldn't see anything. Second, it was hard to move, and so hot inside that the actor actually passed out. Now, about Godzilla's trademark roar, you'd never guess. It was the sound of a leather glove being rubbed against a stringed instrument, a bass of some sort, I think. So overall, this is a pretty good monster movie. Godzilla looks scary in black and white, and the music and gritty cinematography create a foreboding mood. Shots of people crushed under rubble and dying in the hospital are real disturbing, and the choir of girls singing in despair kind of bothers me. They don't treat it like a B-movie, they treat it like it's a real disaster. Now, because Americans tend to dislike foreign films, when it came out here in the US, they chopped the movie down and filmed new scenes with Steve Martin. No, not that Steve Martin, but a character, a journalist named Steve Martin, played by Raymond Burr. Burr had recently played a villain in Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window and would later be famous as Perry Mason. Now, he does a good job in this flick, but the way they use him is to have him narrate over most of the film, describing what's happening.
I can hardly believe what has just happened. Now it seems Tokyo has no defense.
It just seems like an obvious attempt to digest it all for us dumbass American audiences. Now, I could probably talk about this movie for another hour, but we got 28 more to go, so it's time to move on. In the words of Joe Bob, 4 stars, check it out. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. After destroying Tokyo, Japan, Godzilla returns, but this time to tear apart Osaka. For its US release, they changed the title to Gigantus the Fire Monster, but in most video releases, the original title has been restored to Godzilla Raids Again. It's not Gigantus, it's Godzilla, damn it. Even though the movie was made right after the first one, the grim tone of the original is already lost. It opens with the narrator talking over stock footage of nuclear bombs, but here it just seems cliche as this is a convention of the 50s monster movies. But it's classy in that B-movie sort of way. So not only did they bring Godzilla back, but they also brought in another monster named Anguirus or Anguirus. I don't know, they tend to pronounce the name in several different ways as the series progresses. Now, Godzilla and Anguirus, well, they don't like each other. I don't know what it was, but I recall Godzilla saying something about Anguirus' mom, but I don't know. They just fucking hate each other's guts, and Anguirus is a worthy foe, but Godzilla just kicks his ass. This is the first time he fought another monster, a tradition which would last through the rest of the series. Another tradition is this pagoda that gets destroyed. Now, Godzilla's rubber suit was slimmed down a lot from the first film because it was just too damn heavy, and having to battle another monster would only make matters worse. There's an art to making people in rubber suits appear large, and they did a good job in the first movie by filming from low angles and with proper atmospheric haze and camera speed, but this one comes off a little cheaper and probably has the worst shot of Godzilla ever, an aerial view from a helicopter, and he isn't even moving. He looks just like my foot-tall Godzilla action figure. Still, it's a fun movie, and it ends with a great scene where the fighter jets keep blasting at the ice and cause an avalanche which buries Godzilla in a state of frozen hibernation. And how ironic, because hibernation was exactly what Godzilla would be doing for the next 7 years. Meanwhile, Toho, the studio that produces all these movies, began to experiment with other monster flicks. There's Rodan, the Mysterians, Varan the Unbelievable, and Mothra. But after that, Godzilla would make a comeback in the most legendary monster mash of all time. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. King Kong vs. Godzilla. It was simple genius to put two of the most famous monsters together in the battle of the century. It was the American monster against the Japanese monster. It was the East versus the West. And on top of that, this is also the first time both monsters appeared in color. Now, Godzilla had been in hibernation for 7 years, but Kong hadn't been in a film since 1933, and now it was 1962, so it was really about time for him to make a comeback. But realistically, well, nothing here is realistic, but if you were to compare the original Kong with Godzilla, there really wouldn't be much of a fight. Kong was about 25 feet tall, whereas Godzilla was about 167 feet tall, and if you go by the English dub of the first movie, he's 400 feet tall. Besides, regular machine gun bullets from some planes was enough to kill Kong, but Godzilla gets hit by bullets, bombs, and missiles all the time. He's indestructible. Oh, and another thing, he breathes fire, so it's really not fair. But even more hard to believe, it was originally going to be Godzilla vs. Frankenstein. So, scrapping the idea of the classic stop-motion effects, which are costly and time-consuming, Toho made Kong into a rubber suit and beefed him up to Godzilla's size. But at the end, the two monsters duke it out on the slopes of Mount Fuji. It's awesome. Kong throws rocks, using his tail, Godzilla flips one of them back. The fire definitely poses a threat, but Kong keeps coming. He's clearly the underdog of the fight. He gets his face smashed right into a rock, and every time he gets up, Godzilla puts him back down. Then there's the drop kick, which is the only bit of stop motion in the movie. Well, it's really not a fair fight. That is until Kong gets struck by lightning. Yeah, I forgot to tell you that. Lightning makes him stronger. Another indication that he was originally meant to be Frankenstein. But anyway, this is where the fight really starts. My favorite part is when Kong takes a tree and shoves it down Godzilla's throat. That's hilarious. He should have shoved it up his ass. Then there's this part where they look like two hand puppets. It's great. Now, for years, there was a rumor that there were two endings for the film. Supposedly, in the Japanese version, Godzilla wins, and in the American version, Kong wins. This has been documented in books, and remember, this was before the internet. So, yes, as a kid, I used to go to the library and read about Godzilla. It was hard to even find a video rental store that had a copy of any of these movies. But with the advent of the internet, the truth is out. The double ending is a steaming load of bullshit. However, the film itself was altered a lot for its American release by Universal, adding scenes with American actors and recycling music from their horror classics like The Wolfman and Creature from the Black Lagoon. But anyway, who wins the fight? Well, that's up to the viewer to decide. Check it out. It's a great, fun, cheesy monster movie. Now, as much as I hate to say it, but just for technology's sake, it begs for a remake. If they would remake King Kong vs. Godzilla with love and affection for the original movie, then do it. Come on. Oh yeah. You want to know about the Frankenstein thing, right? Alright, so Willis O'Brien, the creator of the original King Kong, suggested a movie where Kong fights a monster that was created by Dr. Frankenstein by sewing together pieces of different animals. But before production, Toho decided to change Frankenstein to Godzilla. But without wasting the idea, Toho actually made Frankenstein Conquers the World, featuring a Godzilla-sized Frankenstein monster who fights another creature named Baragon. They even made a sequel called War of the Gargantuous, another cult classic about two hairy-ass monsters that fight to the death. Supposedly they spawned from pieces of the Frankenstein monster or something like that, but all references to Frankenstein were deleted in the final film. Now, the Frankenstein monster came from Germany, so I bet that it was pretty disappointing for German fans to see mention of their monster removed from the film. So, I don't know how much of this is true, but from what I've gathered, the German release of the film reinstated Frankenstein in the plot, and not only that, but in several of the Godzilla films they explain that the monsters that Godzilla fights are all created by Frankenstein. And that Jet Jaguar is actually supposed to be King Kong in a robot suit. But anyway, we got a while before we start talking about Jet Jaguar. I mean, there's a lot of stuff coming, and this is just Godzilla. I'm not even going to go talk about Gamera yet or anything like that, and I could talk about this stuff for hours. I mean, I just love this shit. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. This one is considered by fans and critics to be one of the best of the series. The creature Mothra had already starred in her own movie, Mothra. She's basically a giant moth or a butterfly, but she's a good monster who only causes destruction when her twin fairies are in trouble. It may sound weird, but that's only because it is. Now in Godzilla vs. Mothra, she lays an egg, but proves to be a rather irresponsible mother because she loses it. A typhoon washes it ashore, where it's discovered by a corporate asshole who wants to make money off it. He makes for a good human villain. The fairies show up and warn him to release the egg, or else Mothra is gonna throw a shit fit. Not only does he refuse, but he kidnaps the fairies too. What a dick. But then Godzilla shows up, making one of his most unusual appearances ever, rising from the ground. Now Godzilla is one clumsy bastard. He gets his tail stuck in a tower and he trips and falls into the pagoda. But how can you blame him? Remember, the actor's head is inside the neck, so he can't see a thing. There's also a scene where the pyrotechnics go haywire and set the head aflame. Luckily, the actor wasn't injured, and for an accident, it looks pretty awesome. Godzilla's just badass in this movie. I mean, he always is, but this is the one that established how indestructible he really is. They try everything to stop him. Battleships, no good. Tanks, oh no, no way. Planes, Electricity, hell no. And look at that. You ain't nothing. Boom. They drop a net and just blast the shit out of him, but nothing works. He just keeps trudging forward, demolishing everything in his path like a force in nature, killing everybody like a villain in a slasher flick. So what can Mothra do about it? Well, the idea of a butterfly fighting Godzilla may sound ridiculous, but it's actually a pretty good fight, even though her only methods of attack are flapping her wings around, spraying a deadly pollen, and dragging Godzilla around by his tail. But just when you think it's over, Mothra's offspring hatch and two little baby Mothras take on Godzilla in the final battle. What a great flick. In the US, the title was changed to Godzilla vs. The Thing. You mean that thing? Or this thing? Or that thing? Or do you mean Mothra? I think they were smoking crack. It's Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Ghidra the three-headed monster is one of the most important entries in the Godzilla series, because it's the first to introduce Ghidra, a three-headed dragon from outer space who shoots lightning at his mouth. He doesn't even have to, he just flies over stuff and the wind destroys everything. There's that pagoda again. Well, Ghidra would become the most popular recurring villain in the Godzilla series, and would later be referred to as Ghidorah. They also bring back Rodan, a pterodactyl sort of creature, and this is Rodan's second film, but first to appear alongside Godzilla. Now, throughout the film, Martians control the mind of a princess and use her voice to speak to the people of Earth and warn of the monster crisis. Meanwhile, there's assassins trying to kill the princess, so why couldn't the Martians choose somebody who's not a target? Godzilla and Rodan spend the whole movie fighting, further proof that Godzilla can't get along with anybody. This is my favorite part right here. Watch, it's the dick drop. Oh, that's gotta hurt. Also, when Rodan yanks on his tail, it's like his head is connected to every movement. So Japan's got all these monsters trampling around, so something's gotta be done. The twin fairies call upon the last offspring of Mothra to come back and be the peacemaker. The other one's supposed to be dead, more or less out of convenience, so there's only one Mothra again. So Mothra goes and tries to talk to Godzilla and Rodan, who are too busy playing volleyball with a boulder. After a few blasts from her web, she gets their attention. One of my favorite moments of the whole series, Rodan has a good chuckle at Godzilla first, then when he gets it too, Godzilla laughs his ass off. Applying human traits to these monsters is where it started to gear towards the younger audience. It's a great scene, and they all sit around and do monster talk while the twin fairies translate for us.
Oh, Godzilla, what terrible language!
Unable to get them to cooperate, Mothra goes to fight Ghidra on her own, gets her ass handed to her, and then Godzilla and Rodan join in. It's 3 monsters against 1, and this is where the monster rumble was born. It's no wonder why this movie was such a big success. 3 heads are better than 1, and 4 monsters are better than 2. It's Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. In the 1960s, the theme of space exploration was very popular. The original Star Trek TV series is one major example, and that's kind of how this feels, like a Star Trek episode with a little bit of Godzilla thrown in. But just for the record, this came out first. The title is usually referred to as Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, but it's also known as Invasion of the Astro Monster and just simply Monster Zero. It's also interesting to note that American actor Nick Adams is the only one speaking English, so he's not dubbed over. The plot involves the discovery of a new planet near Jupiter. It's called Planet X. On this planet they meet a friendly race who are under attack by a monster which they've nicknamed Monster Zero. But surprise, surprise, it's Ghidra. The people of Earth agree to let them borrow Godzilla and Rodan to help battle Ghidra, so they transport the 2 of them to the surface of Planet X to fight. It's pretty awesome because it's the only Godzilla fight to happen somewhere other than Earth. Their first match here is a victory and Ghidra retreats. Oh my god, what the hell is he doing? This victory dance is one of the most famous moments of the whole franchise because it has no purpose in the film and it's completely ridiculous. So the people of Planet X have something else up their sleeves. Ghidra was in their control all along. Using magnetic waves, they also take control of Godzilla and Rodan and unleash all 3 monsters on Earth. I guess don't ever help an alien because all they want to do is take over the world. Well, it's Godzilla's first movie being a good guy from the very start, but already again, he's a bad guy. But not for long. The people of Earth find a way to break the aliens' command and then all the monsters return to their normal selves. And what's that mean? They fight. Mothra was originally scheduled to join the madness, but the budget was getting out of hand, so she got scrapped. Anyway, this is a pretty good one, a little heavy on the sci-fi, but that's all great stuff. Check it out. Oh yeah, we gotta see the dance again. That's awesome. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster involves a group of people who get stranded on an island where there's a secret organization producing nuclear weapons. They capture anyone living on the island and use them as slaves. Nobody can escape because the bad guys also have a giant monster named Ebra under their control who guards the island. Lucky for the good guys, they find Godzilla sleeping in a cave, so they wake him up by attracting a bolt of lightning with a sword. And from there he does battle with the enemy planes, tramples on their base, and fights Ebra. Godzilla looks like the Cookie Monster, and he likes volleyball. This is pretty awkward. And doesn't the music kind of sound like James Bond? Even Mothra makes an appearance, in adult form, and has a brief encounter with Godzilla. He also fights a giant bird, which is probably the worst Godzilla fight ever, because you can't even see what's going on. Should have been the giant claw. Originally, Godzilla's part was written for King Kong. Yeah, after King Kong vs. Godzilla, Toho followed it up with King Kong Escapes, in which Kong fights Robot Kong. But then they were going to have Kong star in this movie, but decide that Godzilla would be more profitable. When you watch the movie, it seems obvious. First of all, they wake Godzilla with electricity, just like in King Kong vs. Godzilla. But that was originally written for Frankenstein. So wow, from Frankenstein to King Kong to Godzilla. Also, Godzilla sort of has a curious romantic interest in a human female, which is another trait that's more like Kong. This tends to be a weak entry in the series. Godzilla doesn't even wake up until like an hour in. So if you want a few laughs, go for it. Otherwise, stay away. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Oh man, Son of Godzilla. Now we're really getting started in a very weird sort of way. Depending on which way you look at it, Son of Godzilla is either one of the worst or one of the best. The setting is once again on an island, but here there's a research team doing weather experiments. Lucky for them, the place is roaming with giant mantises. When a giant egg is discovered, the mantises break it apart, and it turns out to be Godzilla's son, who looks like the Pillsbury Doughboy. He continues to get the shit kicked out of him, till finally his dad shows up and beats the hell out of all the mantises. Bam, 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 what now, bitch? During the fight, he lets his son get hit in the face with a rock and drags the poor little guy by his tail. After the fight's over, he clobbers him and walks away. Doesn't even care about his newborn son. Worst parent ever. But then he comes back and gives him a little ride on his tail, so it's all good. People usually refer to the son as Minya or Manila, but in the movie I don't recall them ever giving him a name. There's lots of great moments, like this scene where Godzilla's trying to sleep and his son plays jump rope with his tail. He trips and Godzilla wakes up like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And he gives a little head nod like, "Dad, go back to sleep." I could do commentary over the whole movie, but it wouldn't help anything. Okay, well here's another favorite part of mine. Whenever he doesn't want to listen to his dad, he shakes and makes a squeaking sound. Like that. Godzilla just drags him and tells him to shut the fuck up. There's another scene where he tries to teach his kid how to breathe fire, even threatening to hit him. Man, what a mean dad. But the poor little guy can only puff smoke rings. That is until Godzilla steps on his tail. Now, rather than try to narrate the entire movie, I guess I better just shut up and let you go watch it for yourself. The final scene involves a fight with a giant spider, and the ending in the snow is actually one of the most heartwarming scenes I ever saw to feature rubber suit monsters. Beneath Godzilla's tough exterior, you learn that he really does care about his son. Overall, the movie is actually quite enjoyable. Some people say it's one of the worst, maybe it is, but I say go check it out for a good laugh. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Destroy All Monsters was originally intended to be the last of the Godzilla films. For this epic grand finale, Toho got together nearly all their monsters and put them all together into this one movie. Godzilla, Godzilla's son, Mothra, Rodan, the giant spider, Baron, Baragon, Manda, Gorosaurus, and Anguillus. The story takes place in the future. The year is 1999, but here all the world's monsters have been rounded up and contained on this one island, Monsterland. Here the monsters live in peace and everything is fine, until an alien race comes down and sets the monsters loose on Earth's cities. Most of the film involves the humans' efforts to break the aliens' control over the monsters. Despite being one of the most famous creature features of all time for its abundance of monsters, most of the monsters only make brief cameo appearances, and the movie seems to focus mostly on the humans, and that can be a little disappointing. But the scene that makes it all worthwhile is the end, when all the monsters team up to fight Ghidorah. It's classic. It is just classic. What really makes it cool is to see all the monsters' unique attacks. Mothra and the spider spit web, Gorosaurus does his kick thing, Godzilla's son puffs a smoke ring which strangles Ghidorah. They were really having a laugh with this one. They pretty much beat the shit out of Ghidorah, and if you saw the earlier films, you'll remember that Ghidorah lost against Godzilla and Rodan alone. Now he's against 7 other monsters. It's really not fair. This is a pretty good one, give it a watch, but skip to the end. It's Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Okay, wow. Godzilla's Revenge. This movie is the wet core of the smelly dog turd, and we're gonna take a bite right in. Oh, there's nothing more sad than a grown man all alone wallowing in his sorrows watching Godzilla's Revenge, let alone making a video about it. I don't even know how to explain this one. All I can say is that this is where the series really started to change direction. Destroy All Monsters was the big finale. It got all the monsters together in a royal rumble and killed the evil Ghidorah. So that was really supposed to be the last movie. but instead they decide to make more and gear them towards children. The plot involves a kid who's a fan of Godzilla. He gets beaten up by bullies and then he gets kidnapped by bad guys. I guess that's all you need to know. So he dreams that he's on Monster Island and becomes friends with Godzilla's son. How is this possible? Well, he can shrink down to human size whenever he wants. That's convenient, and he can talk too.
Godzilla says that I should learn to fight my own battles, you know.
Together, they watch Godzilla fight other monsters, which is shameless stock footage from Son of Godzilla and Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. And I don't mean that they reuse some of the same shots here and there. They literally recycle the same scenes. If they would have included more, it could have been a best of Godzilla compilation. The only redeeming factor is a new monster called Gabra, which looks amazingly stupid. He spends most of the time beating the shit out of Godzilla's son, and his body's surging with electricity. He's like twice as tall, so it would be common sense for Minya to run away. He is called Minya, right? Well, Godzilla keeps forcing him to fight. He's concerned about being a coward instead of being concerned about getting his ass kicked. Eventually, Godzilla helps out and a giant battle's underway. But remember, this is all a dream, and it parallels with the boy's real-life battle with the kidnappers. So he escapes the kidnappers, and then he proves his newfound courage by beating up the bullies. And I don't know which fight is stranger, the monsters jumping around and flying through the air, or this ridiculous LSD-induced strobing fight with the bullies. Some look at this movie with a lighthearted nature and say that it shows a struggle in a youth and that there's some moral lesson to stand up to things and be brave. Yeah, sure, I guess that means to stand up to people who are much bigger than you and to fight monsters that shoot electricity. I don't buy it. Overall, the final monster fight's pretty amusing, but this is undoubtedly the worst of all the Godzilla movies, by far. Any way you look at it, it's absolutely awful. Godzilla's revenge. Who did he get revenge on? That's what I want to know. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness! Godzilla-Thon. Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, also known as Godzilla vs. Hedorah, follows in the line of Godzilla's revenge, targeting it towards kids. Little kids. Little kids who get hopped up on sugar to the point that their brains operate on higher levels of existence and their supersensory nerves subject them to a fantasy world that exceeds that of an adult on the most powerful narcotics known to science. Basically, I'm just trying to say, this movie's really weird. Watching it is like going into a drug-induced mind trip, and even though I said it's geared towards kids, I really can't be sure. Some of it's actually pretty terrifying, like when the smog monster turns people to bones. There's also a scene in a dance club where this guy starts hallucinating and he sees everyone wearing fish masks. I don't know what this has to do with anything. Then there's all these weird animated scenes. It's like watching some kind of children's variety show. There's also a little science lesson about galaxies and nebulas. Yeah, I don't know. This movie's a mixture of horror, children's movie, 70s psychedelic exploitation, and Godzilla. Oh, really? Isn't that why we were here in the first place? Godzilla makes his first appearance coming up to the sunrise with some silly music. He's sure come a long way since he first menaced Tokyo, an icon of destruction, now a savior of the planet. But not in a cool superhero kind of way, in a, hey kids, be good to the earth kind of way. This movie has a theme song called Save the Earth, which plays constantly. Yeah, the smog monster is created from pollution, so the moral lesson of the movie is don't pollute, or else there'll be some weird shit monster that looks like a cross between Oscar the Grouch and the Blob. He's made of crap, so it's like Godzilla's battling a giant turd. Godzilla fights by waving his arms and dancing around. The smog monster fights by throwing Godzilla into a pit and dumping its body of dookie slime all over him. Ugh, it's nasty. He basically shits on everything in sight. I can't believe they did that to a cat. He can also shoot lasers at his eye. Big deal. Godzilla pretty much beats the shit out of him, literally. He just digs into Hedorah's body, pretty much empties all his guts. It's the messiest monster battle ever. He also finds 2 white orbs. At first I thought that these were supposed to be his eyeballs, but you still see the eyes afterwards, so I don't know what the hell these things are supposed to be and why they're in the movie. The whole film is plagued by strange moments such as these. There's a scene where we watch a building crumble, and there's no sound effect or soundtrack whatsoever, it's just silence. Then there's a part where the kid spots Godzilla while up on a roller coaster. It does like this weird freeze frame, and we see Godzilla silhouetted like a black splotch pasted on the background. I don't know, I've always just found this part really weird. Well, actually, the whole movie's really weird. But nothing takes the cake like this. Just watch. I know, I felt the same way when I first saw this. Shocked and speechless. Even the chapter on the DVD menu says something you don't see every day. I agree. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness! Godzilla-Thon. Godzilla vs. Gigan. Oh boy, this one just tips the crap scale. It's a shitfest that has to be seen to be believed.
I think it stinks.
When it was released in the US, they changed the title to Godzilla on Monster Island, even though only a few seconds of the movie actually takes place on Monster Island. That's like calling Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom Indiana Jones in Shanghai, but even that's being generous. The plot concerns a comic book artist who's commissioned to work as a conceptual designer for a children's playground that's monster-themed. The main attraction is a tower that looks like Godzilla, but soon he finds out that this is the base for cockroaches from outer space, specifically the Space Hunter Nebula M who want to take over the world. Literally, they're cockroaches wearing human skin. The big drawback of this movie is that it takes a long time to get started. There's barely any monster action until at least 45 minutes in. 2 jewels in outer space burst into flame and out come King Ghidorah and Gigan. It's like, thank God something's happening. Ghidorah looks really bad when he's flying. It looks like he's a stiff plastic model. If you're as big as a nerd as I am, you might be wondering how Ghidorah can be alive. Wasn't he killed at the end of Destroy All Monsters? Yeah, they stomped the shit out of him and put him in the ground. Well, you're even more of a nerd if you want to know the answer. Well, Destroy All Monsters took place in the future. This one we can assume is back in the present time, before Ghidorah was killed. So you might think including one of the best Godzilla villains would lift the presence of this awful movie, which he does, but lots of what we see is nothing but recycled footage from earlier Godzilla films. Even if the lighting doesn't match and that the Godzilla costume's different, it's shameless stock footage. At least we get to see Godzilla get blasted in the balls again. That's pretty funny. But let's talk about Gigan. For one of the worst Godzilla movies, he's actually one of the most interesting monsters ever seen. He's a weird thing. I don't even know how to describe it, but you can see for yourself. He's got metal hooks for hands and a buzzsaw on his chest. Oh, and by the way, the monsters are being controlled by the cockroaches. Oh, did you guess that already? Yeah, you're catching on. But the military sure doesn't catch on. When are they going to learn that planes can't kill giant monsters? It never worked before, so why would it work now? So Godzilla comes to save the day, and he brings with him sidekick Anguirus. And as if this movie hasn't already been pretty strange, the monsters start talking.
Hey, Carmilla! What do you want? Something funny going on. You better check. Oh, yeah. Hey, Aquila, come on. There's a lot of trouble ahead.
I have no clue what the hell they're saying. But I've heard that in the original Japanese version, you don't hear them speak. There's speech bubbles. Kind of fits the comic book theme, but what asshole decided that they needed to actually talk? The 2 monsters fight like a tag team match. Definitely the highlight of the film. But its repeated use of stock footage wears old, and so does the Godzilla costume. It's been used in so many films that you can actually see it falling apart. Look at the arms. I can deal with that. But would it have been too much trouble to keep the famous Godzilla roar from fucking up? You gotta be joking, what happened? Sounds like somebody playing with a record. And if that's not enough, Godzilla bleeds. Come on, Angus, don't step in the saw, you dumb shit. Oh, come on. Was that necessary? Because all the gratuitous bloodshed and swearing.
You're a hard bitch.
This one is a drastic change in pace from Godzilla's Revenge and Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster. Is it for kids, adults, or people on drugs? Yeah, people on drugs. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Godzilla vs. Megalon, here we go. The poster shows Godzilla fighting Megalon on top of the World Trade Center, something that never happens in the movie. There's not even a single scene that takes place in New York City, so how the hell did they come up with that? Also, not to mention, it would be physically impossible given the size of the monsters. Sure, King Kong could do it, but Godzilla's taller than the building itself. The plot centers around a race of people living underground who look like seductive Ku Klux Klan members. What the fuck? The people of Earth, or I mean ground level Earth, are conducting all these nuclear bomb tests, but the underground people don't like this at all. In fact, it pisses them off. And they have a monster named Megalon, a giant bomb-spitting bug with drills for hands. And that's one mistake you don't want to make, pissing somebody off who has a monster. So rather than going up to the surface and saying, "Hey, we live downstairs, could you please stop with all the nuclear bombs? It's kinda loud." Instead, they send Megalon up there to throw a shit fit. Okay, that's a nice way to handle it. That's like if I had my TV turned up really loud and some neighbor that I didn't even know existed got real mad and sent their pet tiger in through my window. So there's a giant monster roaming around. They try taking it down with planes, tanks, and laser cannons. It doesn't work. What a surprise. Then Godzilla comes to save the day. Same old shit. But the one reason why this movie stands out from all the rest is because of Jet Jaguar, a flying robot that changes size. I don't even need to say any more. You look at him and just laugh. It probably comes as no surprise that the idea Jet Jaguar came from an elementary school student. No joke. They were having a contest for kids to submit their own robot superheroes, which was all a craze at the time, like Ultraman and Spectre-Man. Originally, Jet Jaguar was meant to be the star of the movie, but Godzilla was thrown in at the last minute because it would have more marquee value. Reputedly, the whole movie was filmed in only 3 weeks. No wonder, because there's so much stock footage. Jet Jaguar shows up and plays charades with Godzilla. Then, the two of them team up to fight Megalon. Outnumbered, the Toga people call the Space Hunter Nebula M to ask them to send Gigan over to help. That's convenient. It's like, hey, can I borrow your monster? So, once again, it's 2 monsters against 2 in a final showdown. Godzilla fights like a boxer. Jet Jaguar gets his ass kicked. What do you expect? Megalon keeps spitting fire bombs. Look at this shot. And check it out again. It's like the same shot being repeated. Day and night switch drastically, and stock footage from Godzilla vs. Gigan is used over and over. There are some great moments though, like when Jet Jaguar throws Gigan into the air and Godzilla blasts him with his fiery breath. Then the best moment of all, a priceless gem of cinematic entertainment that defies any law of reality that could possibly exist. Everybody in the world needs to see this. Watch. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And they knew it was awesome because there's a replay. Yeah, you get to see the same shot twice. How does he do that? I guess it's all about the tail support. And to put an end to this overload of awesomeness, I'm going to leave you with the Jet Jaguar song. That's the meaning of life. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon.
Oh, Godzilla!
Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, also known as Godzilla vs. the Cosmic Monster, also known as Godzilla vs. the Bionic Monster. Is that enough titles? It was the year 1974, Godzilla's 20th anniversary, and for the occasion, Toho decided to cut the bullshit. We've seen the Big G evolve from a brutal force of destruction to a children-loving defender of the Earth. The last few installments in the series were definitely subpar, but now they've come up with a brilliant way to show off Godzilla's destruction again, but keep him a hero at the same time. How so? With 2 Godzillas for the price of 1. As the movie begins, Godzilla goes on a rampage through Japan. What's his problem? Is he just in a bad mood? Or is it not the real Godzilla? Anguirus shows up and the two of them get into a fight, reminiscent of Godzilla raids again. During the battle, Anguirus scrapes off some of Godzilla's flesh, exposing metal underneath. This is your first clue. Anyway, remember King Kong's fatality move, where he rips the dinosaur's jaw open? Well, Godzilla does the same thing to Anguirus. Damn.
Finish him.
Well, it's not Godzilla, is it? It's an imposter. The real Godzilla shows up and the two of them have a spectacular brawl in an industrial area at night. Godzilla keeps blowing away the fake Godzilla's flesh, revealing it to be some sort of a Terminator Godzilla.
You could call it a Mechagodzilla.
Well, that explains that. Wow, now time to show off the weapons. Amazing. Finger missiles, toe missiles, knee missiles, Mechagodzilla has it all. Even a ray gun on his chest, the ability to shoot lasers from his eyes, and rocket jets which enable flight. Mechagodzilla is controlled by space apes. Yeah, no kidding. Whenever they're shot, stabbed, or beaten up, they revert to their true form.
I'm gonna go back inside and take care of those bastards.
After Godzilla loses his first battle to Mechagodzilla, he retreats and then finds out that he has some incredible bad luck because he gets struck by lightning again and again and again. But at least it makes him stronger, or so we assume. Before the rematch, we introduce a bonus monster, a lazy one I might add, because it only wakes up if you sing to it. Yeah, that's the King Caesar song. And it goes on forever. And just when you thought it's over, she starts fucking singing again. And keep in mind, you're seeing my abridged version, but seriously, this song goes on for a really long time. Then he wakes up with a random explosion. Wouldn't it be cool if there was an explosion every time he got out of bed in the morning? He's like a lion god or something. One of the weirdest monsters ever, but everybody likes him a lot. Too bad, because Mechagodzilla beats the living crap out of him, and then Godzilla comes to help. It's an awesome fight. Mechagodzilla shows off more of its skills. It can spin its head around, creating a force field. It can also face backwards so that it can shoot from behind and front at the same time. Mechagodzilla just unloads all his firepower and turns Godzilla into a blood sprinkler. Eventually, Godzilla turns himself into a magnet. Whether it's from Mechagodzilla's darts or from the contained power of lightning, I don't know, but lucky for him, he's able to pull Mechagodzilla toward him and twist his head around till it comes off. Surprising, because his head seemed pretty flexible before. This is a great entry in the series, delightfully cheesy and enjoyable.
Damn Godzilla.
Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Terror of Mechagodzilla was originally known in Japan as Mechagodzilla's Counterattack, and the first US translation was called Terror of Godzilla, even though Mechagodzilla is clearly the bad guy in the movie. Somebody has a serious titling problem. But maybe it was a foreshadowing of what will come next. But let's not jump ahead. The movie's a direct sequel to the last one, with the aliens rebuilding Mechagodzilla. Too bad they don't ever turn back into apes, they just wear these ridiculous silver jumpsuits the whole time. They join forces with an angry scientist, Dr. Mifune, shunned for his strange experiments with sea life, who seeks revenge on humanity. For being dismissed in the field of science, what better revenge is there than to take control of a giant sea monster and send it to destroy cities? The new monster's name is Titanosaurus. There's not a whole lot to this creature, just a more aquatic looking version of Godzilla. His special attack is using his fins to cause heavy windstorms. For a decent looking monster, he sure has an annoying cackle. My favorite part of the whole movie, and probably one of my favorite little moments of the whole series, is when Godzilla makes his first appearance. Check it out. There's a good amount of monster battle going on, and the stakes are raised because this time Godzilla's up against two monsters and has no allies. There's plenty of explosions. And I do mean plenty. Mechagodzilla doesn't have anything new, no fancy head-spinning tricks, but he still has an incredible supply of ammunition. Enough to set the Godzilla suit on fire, something that doesn't happen too often. Titanosaurus has one pretty funny moment in which he lifts Godzilla by the mouth. Once again, Mechagodzilla's head gets removed, but this time he can still fight, even without the head. It's a nice twist, and overall, a nice monster mash. In the final shot, Godzilla returns to the sea. It's an appropriate farewell because for the next 10 years, Toho gave the monster star a much-deserved rest. This concludes the original Godzilla series. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. After a decade-long rest, Toho finally brought their famous monster star back, this time with a bigger budget and modern look. After Godzilla evolved into a superhero, they decided to make him a bad guy again, a deadly force of destruction, a pivotal decision that would affect the rest of the series. It was released in Japan in 1984, simply titled Godzilla. But this was not a remake, it was a direct sequel to the original, ignoring everything that happened in between, but still taking place 30 years later. As far as the plot goes, there's nothing special. Godzilla just shows up and throws a fit, same old stuff. The Godzilla suit, effects, and lavish miniature sets all look much more sophisticated, but still outdated by today's standards. There are moments when Godzilla looks real good and even scary, but some of the animatronic close-ups look like shit. One interesting thing to note is that the first attack in the movie is not from Godzilla, but sea lice. What the hell? The combat scenes with the army are pretty cool. The highlight is the new flying weapon, the Super X. There's also the infamous Cold War tension which was going on at the time. There's a scene where the Russians launch a missile at Godzilla, but in the US re-edit, they seem to deliberately launch the missile at Tokyo. Pretty fucked up. The 1985 US re-edit was distributed by monster master Roger Corman nonetheless. It also recast Raymond Burr, returning as his character Steve Martin from the original. But now, the actor Steve Martin was popular, so they simply refer to him as Mr. Martin instead. Overall, it's not as campy as the classics or as spectacular as the newer ones. It falls somewhere in between. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. One problem with Godzilla 1985 is that Godzilla was on his own. He didn't have any monsters to fight. So for the sequel, Toho decided to hold a contest to write the plot and invent an original monster. As it turns out, it's a weird plot. Scientists find Godzilla's cells and combine them with that of a plant to create a giant plant monster which goes on a rampage. Well, then why'd you do that? You don't mix Godzilla cells with a plant unless you want trouble. This tends to be a very overlooked film in the series because Biollante isn't one of the classic Godzilla enemies, but it's definitely worth a look. It's strange, but original. Basically a bunch of tentacles with Venus flytraps at the ends and a giant crocodile mouth. Perhaps if they called it Godzilla vs. Little Shop of Horrors, it would have had more marquee value. Again, the combat scenes with Godzilla fighting the military are great spectacles to watch. They also bring in another new weapon, the Super X-2. Yeah, the usual planes and battleships get boring after a while, so it's always cool to see something new. But at last, I'd like to mention that this one was never released in the US. Theatrically. It was never released theatrically in the US, but it aired on cable television in the US, and it was released on VHS, English dubbed. Yes, I owned it, but it would be the last one that I'd owned for a while, because following Godzilla movies throughout the 90s were not released in the US in any form whatsoever, not until the advent of DVD. However, they were available, fortunately subtitled, as special imports on VHS. Once DVD came around, every Godzilla movie saw a Western release. I hope that clears it up. It's Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. This is one of the best of the entire franchise. It features a revival of Godzilla's most memorable adversary. It has outstanding action sequences and an intriguing plot involving time travel. It also explains the origin of Godzilla. Of course, we know that he was mutated by some kind of nuclear radiation, but what we learn here is that he was originally a dinosaur, a Godzillasaurus. Why do we need to know that? Well, because it's important to the plot. Evildoers from the future come back before Godzillasaurus was mutated and moved him from his island, replacing him with 3 cute little creatures called Doraks. When the atom bomb goes off, it merges the little guys into Ghidorah, who's under the bad guy's control. So basically what they did was erase Godzilla from history and replace him with their own monster to destroy Japan. So the only thing that could stop Ghidorah is Godzilla, but unfortunately he doesn't exist anymore. But luck has it, a new Godzilla is created by a nuclear sub. So the good news is Godzilla's back, and the bad news is Godzilla's back. Supposedly he's bigger and badder than the last Godzilla, and he still causes destruction. I gotta tell you about my favorite scene. There's a Japanese war veteran who claims that his life was saved by the Godzillasaurus in World War II. To make a long story short, he gets all sentimental about Godzilla and thinks he's his friend. Nobody ever got it that bad. But there's another funny scene. When the time travelers go back in the 1940s, they're spotted by 2 American soldiers.
It did look like it was from another planet, but... Shall we report it, sir?
What, that we're being invaded by little green men from outer space? Let's just keep it as our secret. You can tell your son about it when he's born. Major Spielberg?
Oh, okay, so that's how Spielberg got the idea for Close Encounters in E.T. But of course, the big highlight are the fight scenes with Ghidorah. Good stuff. In the first battle, Godzilla blows his head off and fucking fries that bastard. So now that they got Ghidorah taken care of, the only problem is getting rid of Godzilla too. And the only thing that can stop him is Ghidorah, so hey, it's like they fucked themselves. The problem is reversed. So what do? They get Ghidorah back. It's like a continuous pattern. They replace the missing head with a robot one and equip it with all new weapons. And yes, this character is officially known as Mecha Ghidorah. It's one of the most memorable monster battles ever, and definitely one of my favorite Godzilla movies. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Godzilla vs. Mothra. By now, Toho is making a Godzilla movie every year for the first half of the 90s. After bringing Ghidorah into the new series, they decided to follow it with a remake of Godzilla vs. Mothra. However, remake is a bad choice of words because it's a completely different storyline. Mothra still hatches out of an egg, starts in larva form, and goes into a cocoon before becoming her final form. That's all the same. But the twin fairies who Mothra guards explain themselves as the Earth's cosmos that keep nature in balance. And when humankind upsets the balance of the Earth, an evil Mothra appears named Batra. Batra is responsible for defending the Earth, but goes too far and ends up causing more destruction than necessary. So the good Mothra is sent in to straighten his ass out. Batra again starts as an armored caterpillar before cocooning into its final form. While the storyline generally revolves around Mothra and Batra, Godzilla of course joins in as well. Their first battle takes place in water in larva stage, and their final battle takes place in the city, both in full form. They all seem to be enemies, but at the end, Mothra and Batra team up against Godzilla. Kinda seems like the same old shit, but it's a pretty good entry in the series. It was so popular that Mothra became one of few characters to escape the Godzilla franchise and star in Rebirth of Mothra 1, 2, and 3. Originally starring in her own film, Mothra, it was fitting that she was able to break free again. Coming next, Toho would reinvent another one of their classic monsters. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Toho was on a roll, remaking all their classic monsters. First King Ghidorah, then Mothra, and now Mechagodzilla, not to mention Rodan and Godzilla's son, too. The title is usually referred to Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, even though it would actually be the third movie to feature Mechagodzilla, but this is the second time the character's been introduced. The interesting thing was that before, Godzilla was the good guy and Mechagodzilla was the bad guy, but now the roles have been reversed. 2 films prior to this, Godzilla and Ghidorah fell into the ocean, so now they lift the robotic armor from Ghidorah out of the ocean and use it to create Mechagodzilla to defend the people of Earth from Godzilla. When comparing this Mechagodzilla to the old one, I have conflicting opinions. On one hand, I like the fact that this one actually looks like it's made of metal. It has that shiny finish opposed to that old dull look of the last one. But the new one has that dopey expression on its face. The old one actually looked mean, so yeah, I prefer the classic Mechagodzilla. So a team of scientists find an egg which holds a baby Godzilla. Rodan comes in and tries to eat it, but Godzilla defends his son. Godzilla and Rodan never got along too well. The humans take the egg, it hatches, and a new baby Godzilla is born. Then Godzilla comes to destroy the city, and they turn Mechagodzilla loose. So Mechagodzilla blasts Godzilla with his Mega Buster, laser cannon, plasma grenades, paralyzer missiles, and shocks him with an anchor. Godzilla gets fucked up pretty good. Fortunately, Godzilla is able to reverse the shock and cripple Mechagodzilla. But you can't guess what happens next. Yeah, they send out the army tanks. Will they never understand that tanks don't do jack shit to Godzilla? It's the equivalent of touching your hand to a hot stove over and over. Just give it up already. The humans do a bunch of experiments on the baby and find out that he has another brain up his ass. Nah, just kidding, it's in his tail. So they assume that Godzilla does too, and they plan to use this knowledge to gain an advantage. Also, this baby Godzilla looks pretty good, like a small reptile. Way better than Minya from Son of Godzilla. Minya looks so stupid in comparison. There's a scene where Rodan flies over the Magic Kingdom in Disney World. Too bad he didn't stop off and take a shit all over Space Mountain. Anyway, soon after, Rodan and Mechagodzilla go at it, and Mechagodzilla beats the shit out of him. Afterwards, Godzilla comes back to fight, but Mechagodzilla combines with another weapon and turns into Super Mechagodzilla. In the original ending, Godzilla died and the son lived on, but instead they saved that ending for Godzilla vs. Destroyer. Overall, this is probably my second favorite Godzilla movie from the second series. It's a good one. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla begins with scientists who are making a giant robot nicknamed Mothra, just a big dumb-looking robot that makes me think of Mechagodzilla, except less cool. Mothra's first appearance was actually in The Mysterians in 1957. Mothra actually makes an appearance. You see, there's an explanation that somehow Godzilla's cells got carried on to Mothra when she flew into space, and that the cells went into a black hole and mutated as Space Godzilla. Now, as ridiculous as it sounds, I'll accept that, but they offer another explanation, that the cells came from Biollante, a creature spawned from Godzilla cells and plant cells, and that after fighting Biollante, the cells drifted up into space. I've never heard a movie give 2 elaborate explanations to anything like that, when one was clearly enough. Also, let's not forget that Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah altered the timeline and meant that Godzilla never existed until that movie, which means that there couldn't have been a Biollante since there were no Godzilla cells. Oh, I don't know, fuck it. Later, there's a team on Birth Island and they see baby Godzilla, who's now a little older and starting to look more like Minya from the old series.
Godzilla says that I should learn to fight my own battles, you know.
Of course, because he's the son of the king of the monsters, he has to look like a cute little Pillsbury Doughboy. What the hell? Then Godzilla comes out of the water and they shoot him in the back of the head with a mind control device, but that doesn't work at all. Next, Mothra comes in contact with Space Godzilla, who's on his way to Earth. Mothra gets his ass kicked. Yeah, the effects are still great, but some of this comes off as being rushed. There's even a scene where Godzilla's tail falls off. Also, Space Godzilla is just a really dumb name. So, Space Godzilla lands on Birth Island. Junior walks up to him like the dumb shit he is. Did he think Space Godzilla was his dad? Man, kid's no dick. Anyway, so Godzilla comes along and attempts to fight, but Space Godzilla kicks his ass and kidnaps his kid. You know, Gabber never even tried that. Space Godzilla's just a creep. Next, Space Godzilla fucks up a bunch of cities and then creates big, huge-ass crystals that become his new fortress. So, Godzilla and Mothra head toward it to stop Space Godzilla and rescue the baby. When they arrive, Mothra shoots a bunch of shit at Space Godzilla. Missiles, chest lasers, and even does a screw attack. Yeah, not like Samus, though. Space Godzilla's pretty powerful. He uses spikes from his fortress as missiles, and even has a shield to deflect Godzilla's atomic breath. The pilots find out that Space Godzilla is getting his energy from a large tower, which Godzilla and Mothra demolish. Then Godzilla and Mothra try to destroy the crystals in Space Godzilla's body, but he gets fucking pissed and he impales Mothra with his tail. They use the same idea in Metroid Prime when Samus is fighting the Omega Pirate boss. Samus has to blow off the shoulder crystals just like in this movie. Anyway, Godzilla ends up just killing Space Godzilla with the fire breath again, just the same way he did to Super Mecha Godzilla. Overall, it's a good addition to the franchise, but not without its flaws. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. And so we come to the final Godzilla movie of the second series, Godzilla vs. Destroyer! While the second series was a great revival of the franchise, it was nice that they didn't let it drag on until it got stupid. And being that this was the 40th anniversary of Godzilla, Toho decided that this should be the last one, and so it came that Godzilla died. It was a big deal. It was like when Superman supposedly died, or when Beavis and Butthead were supposed to die, even though they didn't. But it was such a big deal that I remember hearing about it on the news. And this was in the USA, so what do we care? These movies weren't even being released here anyway. But still, the news of Godzilla's death heard around the world. But anyway, let's talk about the movie. It begins with one of the most incredible title screens ever. That's awesome. The opening scene depicts Godzilla attacking not Tokyo, but Hong Kong, in glowing red. What's wrong with him? Well, you remember how he was born from nuclear radiation? Well, his heart is a nuclear reactor and it's melting down. That's the actual explanation in the movie, I'm not kidding. This burnt form of Godzilla is also in the Nintendo Wii game, Godzilla Unleashed. So anyway, his heart is on the verge of atomic explosion that'll blow up the whole universe. Pretty fucking extreme. Next thing, there's all these creatures running around which look like a combination of a scorpion, the predator, and alien with the thing coming out of its mouth. Scenes like this where people are being attacked almost make you forget that you're watching a Godzilla movie and instead a B-horror movie. Well, all these creatures evolved from tiny organisms in the ocean. There's a scientific explanation how they were created by the Oxygen Destroyer, the weapon which killed the first Godzilla. It's a neat and appropriate way to tie the first movie with the last. So the monsters keep evolving until they all merge into one. The name of the monster, surprisingly, isn't Destroyer, it's Destroyer! Yeah, that's the official name, Destroyer! It's spelled just like that. Maybe because they couldn't trademark Destroyer, but I don't know. So they send out a plane and it freezes Godzilla. It's actually a pretty cool effect when his face freezes. And once again, they send out the army to fight the giant monsters. It's been 22 damn movies and they still don't get it? Give it up! Well, baby Godzilla's back this time, called Godzilla Jr., and this time he actually looks like Godzilla. And it's about time. Shouldn't he resemble his own father? He gets into a fight with the evolving Destroyer and actually beats him. Junior and Godzilla get together to celebrate, I guess, but then the final form of Destroyer makes his appearance. He looks like the goddamn devil. Destroyer grabs Junior and drops him into a building, then blasts it apart, basically killing him. He drags Godzilla all around and slices him up. It's actually pretty disappointing that Godzilla gets his ass kicked and that he never actually beats Destroyer. He sure fights back, but it's the army that ultimately takes him down. What the hell? After it's all over, Godzilla finally starts to melt down, but the army uses their freeze cannons to cool him down so the explosion doesn't kill everybody. Surprisingly, watching Godzilla die is pretty sad, but all the energy from his body goes into his son, who grows to full Godzilla size. I guess they were hinting at another Godzilla series following the son, but they never followed up on that idea. The credits roll over black and white stills from all the Godzilla movies. It makes you feel sentimental, it really does. Anyone who thought that this was the last Godzilla movie had no clue what was coming. He was only taking a 5-year rest. One thing left to say? Destroya! Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Honestly, I shouldn't even be giving this movie a review. It has no purpose on our Godzilla-Thon because it's not a real Godzilla movie. But because it bears the name, I feel as if I have to address it. To date, this is the only Godzilla movie made outside of Japan, and it turned out to be a big mistake. Let's rewind back to 1993. Jurassic Park hit the scene, pushed the boundaries of special effects, and made dinosaurs awesome again. I remember reading a newspaper article at the time that TriStar acquired the rights from Toho to produce an American remake of Godzilla. I almost shit my pants. It was a dream come true. I wanted to see Godzilla's awesome force of destruction on the big screen, and maybe then people would take the King of the Monsters a little more seriously. Whenever I would tell people that I was into Godzilla, people would laugh at me. Guy in a rubber suit, bad dubbing, yeah, you know. I can understand why the mainstream moviegoers don't like foreign films. When it's dubbed, it's hard to take it seriously, but when it's subtitled, you have to read your way through the movie. Yeah, if I want to read, I'll get a friggin' book. Depends on the movie, but for something like this, I usually prefer dubbing because I'm lazy and I just want to watch a movie. Watch it, not read it. So, with that said, I had high hopes that the American Godzilla would overcome all those problems and gain wider recognition for one of the greatest monsters of all time. But through countless delays, I had to wait 5 years for this movie to see the light of day in 1998. But I got my fix with the Jurassic Park sequel, The Lost World. It was an average sequel, but the highlight was the final scene where the T-Rex goes on a rampage through the city. There's even a moment when Japanese tourists are running away saying, "I left Japan to get away from this." It was a great little tribute, but had I known that this was more honorable to Godzilla than the shit that we were going to see next. Finally, trailers started popping up which would show Godzilla's foot. This was our first sign that something was wrong. The foot looked like a T-Rex. Didn't we see that already? Isn't this supposed to be Godzilla? Then the marketing campaign picked up. You couldn't look anywhere without seeing advertisements, like a bus would drive by with a sign that says, "His foot is bigger than this bus." And there was the slogan, "Size does matter." There was even a music video by Puff Daddy and Jimmy Page, one of the most shocking musical collaborations ever. So all the hype definitely amplified the disappointment, but let's start talking about the movie. It stars Matthew Broderick as a scientist. The plot is nothing more than you'd expect, just a lot of shitty dialogue. But the main focus of what I want to talk about is Godzilla. Just look at him. It looks nothing like Godzilla, and I expected him to look different. I wanted him to look different. I'm all for updating the image of a classic monster and making him more realistic and kick-ass for today's standards. I knew it was going to be all CGI and no guy in a rubber suit. I expected that. But what we got was something that didn't even fit the requirements. None of Godzilla's trademark characteristics were incorporated. Does he breathe fire? No, not really. There's a couple moments when he sort of blows on cars and they explode. But it's not like the fire's really coming from his mouth. I don't know. And if size matters, why is he so much smaller and weaker than the real Godzilla? They actually kill him with missiles. Yeah, they shoot him down. That's it. Did they ever even see a Godzilla movie? The army is not supposed to kill him. The only thing that stands a chance against Godzilla is another giant monster. And that was another disappointment, that there's no rival for Godzilla to fight. Long before the film's release, I read an early script in which he fights a monster called the Griffin. Why they scrapped that, I have no idea. I even heard that it was originally supposed to be King Ghidorah. That would have been awesome if they did it right. There's also some weird thing about Godzilla laying eggs, which hatch into velociraptors. Yeah, seriously, it's just like the raptors from Jurassic Park. Clearly, this movie owed more to Jurassic Park than it did to Godzilla. There's also one egg left at the end, setting it up for a sequel that never happened, although there was an animated series which continued the story. It's funny to note that the mayor in New York City in the movie is named Ebert and his top advisor is Gene, an obvious nod to the critics Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert. Their basic consensus was, yeah, that's cool, but the movie still sucks. Now, listen, I'm not trying to jump on the bandwagon and hate on this movie like everyone else. I'm just putting the whole thing in retrospect. I was a big Godzilla fan, I was young, and I was disappointed. But it's been 10 years, and I've gotten over it. I've given the movie a second watch, and for what it is, it's not bad. I mean, it's not high-class entertainment. It's a monster movie. It's popcorn entertainment. I feel as if the same problem occurred with Independence Day. It was an entertaining movie, but a lot of people hated it, and I don't understand what they were expecting. It's about aliens that come down and blow shit up. That's it. If you wanted something more, like the meaning of life, you're not going to get it. But the problem with this movie is that they called it Godzilla. It was a chance to introduce the monster to Western audiences, but instead they made something completely different that might as well have been a remake of The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. It followed the basic idea of a giant reptilian creature, but it could have been almost anything. The name Godzilla was slapped on it just for marquee value. They were interested in the name and not the actual character. Two simple things. He breathes fire and he's indestructible. Some people have said, well, that was too unrealistic and they were trying to make a more serious approach with this one. But that's horse shit. That's like trying to make Spider-Man realistic and not allowing him to shoot web. It doesn't matter if it's realistic or not, that's a time-honored trademark of the character. Spider-Man shoots web, Godzilla shoots fire. This is not Godzilla. In fact, Toho officially renamed the monster Zilla. They even make a reference to it in the movie Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All Out Attack. Early in the film, when they're discussing the history of Godzilla, they mention that in 1998 a monster attacked New York City. The Americans think it was Godzilla, but it really wasn't. And later, in Godzilla Final Wars, there's a brief cameo where Zilla fights Godzilla and basically gets annihilated with one single blast of his nuclear breath. Too bad Zilla didn't have nuclear breath. Bottom line, Godzilla 1998 should officially be renamed Zilla. It's not worthy of God, it's just Zilla. And even that sounds too much like it. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. In 1995, Toho killed off Godzilla. In 1998, TriStar raped the name. But then, in what seemed like retaliation, Toho countered back with a new movie that was basically what the American version should have been. It was like a can of air refresher after someone took a nasty shit. It was the first Godzilla movie to be released theatrically in the US since 1985. For many American audiences like myself, it was the first time having the opportunity to see a real Godzilla movie on the big screen. For the fans, it was a miracle. But for the general public, it seemed to get overlooked. People were confused, thinking it was a sequel to the American version, but we knew it was the real deal. Again, it was sort of a remake, a kickstart to a new series. We assume that it ignores previous installments in the franchise. Godzilla's new look was pretty cool. They made him look different, but kept the overall impression. See, that's how it should have been done. There's a shot where Godzilla's running in the background, which is kinda interesting. But there's also some pretty bad ones. Though most of the time Godzilla's a rubber suit, there's some shots where he's computer generated, and those moments really contrast with the rest of the film and they look awful. Sometimes it just looks better when there's really something in front of the camera. As far as the plot goes, it's nothing special. There's a team of people who ride around and try to find Godzilla. They're called the Godzilla Prevention Network, like they're forecasting a storm. Of course, the army comes in to try attack Godzilla. We've never seen that before. As redundant as that is, it's like a tradition. You gotta have the army scenes. But what makes the movie so great is Godzilla's opponent. To begin with, it was a surprise because going into the movie, we didn't really expect him to fight another monster this time, because with remakes, Godzilla's always been solo. But this monster doesn't even reveal itself until the end of the movie. It starts as a UFO, which looks like a flying whale turd. In the final fight, the UFO extracts Godzilla's DNA and then morphs into the monster we call Orga. Orga is one of the most unique of his enemies to date. Probably the last new enemy of Godzilla that was actually pretty cool. He's so big, he's actually able to swallow Godzilla, or at least partially devour him like a snake eating a rat. But uh-oh, that was a bad idea. Oh! Good stuff. Nothing more or less than what you'd expect, but it was just a nice treat to be able to see Godzilla in the theater in the year 2000 and have such a quick reparation from the disaster 2 years ago. Actually, in Japan, it came out in 1999, only a year after the American version. It couldn't have been any quicker. Unfortunately, it was the last Godzilla movie to be released theatrically here in the US, but it was great to know that Toho was making them again year after year, and eventually they all came to DVD. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Godzilla vs. Megagyrus. Once the third Godzilla series kicked off, you'd think that they'd be all consecutive sequels. But guess what? This one is actually yet another remake, ignoring all previous films except for the first one. Interesting. Okay, so where do we begin? Well, there's a military device that shoots black holes. A dragonfly comes out the hole, lays an egg, and nasty insects come out. Wow. Where are we going with this? Well, anyway, the insects actually first appeared in the 1956 film Rodan. Another interesting way to tie it in with one of the earlier movies. The insects all fight Godzilla, who pretty much gets the best of them. But they inject some of Godzilla's blood into a giant cocoon which becomes Megagyrus, basically a giant death moth. Some of the effects where Godzilla's underwater are all CG and they look like total garbage. There's a pretty neat scene where someone attaches a homing device to Godzilla's back. It's not too often when someone's able to touch him. They also try to suck him into a black hole, so besides all the usual planes and tanks, they were at least getting kind of creative with different ways to stop Godzilla. There's a really funny moment, which is probably the funniest since Godzilla's drop kick against Megalon. It's when he leaps in the air and does a body slam. Look, there he goes! So Megagyrus starts shooting atomic breath because he originated from Godzilla's DNA, like so many of his recent enemies. Overall, it's not one of the best, and the formula gets a little tiring, but it was still nice to get another Godzilla movie. After this, the series would pick up a little more, so stay tuned, we're almost done. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Okay, this one is called Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. Just rolls off your tongue. Seriously, what kind of title is that? Anyway, this one, again, is another sequel to the original, and we assume that it ignores all in between. Why do they keep doing that? Godzilla's given a new look again, this time looking more like the classic Godzilla, but with blank white eyes. Now, as one would expect from the title, Mothra and King Ghidorah are present, but there's also Baragon. Why did he get left out of the title? Was it too long for just one more? Baragon first made his appearance in Frankenstein Conquers the World, and he also made a brief appearance in Destroy All Monsters. He was supposed to have more scenes where he was attacking Paris, but they replaced him with Gorosaurus. Then, he was supposed to be in the original Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, but they replaced him with Anguirus. Now, he finally gets a big part in another movie, and they don't even put him in the title. Bottom line, nobody gives a shit about Baragon. There's also a monster from the Gamera series called Barugun that shoots rainbows out its back. That's Baragon and Barugun. Get it right. They're two totally, completely different things. They just happen to look almost identical and have basically the same name. Then there's Mothra, who looks quite good. Before, she's always looked kind of like a fluffy butterfly piece of shit, but now she's finally got a decent update. This time you actually see the damage that the monsters are causing. I mean, before you'd always see people running, but now you actually see people getting injured. Ghidorah makes his appearance during the final fight, but this time they're both against Godzilla. And in between it all, there's some army intervention, but Godzilla eradicates their ass. Man, you don't fuck with Godzilla. He takes on everybody. Boom! 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 Man, this is out of control. The special effects are pretty spectacular, too. This movie starts out a little slow, but by the end, you're exhilarated. A satisfying entry in the series, despite some quirky things to make fun of, it's actually a pretty damn good monster flick. One of the best of the Millennium series. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Okay, this is Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, sometimes called Godzilla X Mechagodzilla, but it should really just be called Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 3. From now on, there weren't really any new monsters in the Godzilla universe. They were down to remaking the same ones over and over, this time Mechagodzilla again. I've mentioned that I preferred the 70s Mechagodzilla over the 90s version, but the Millennium version gives us a happy balance, coming closer to the design of the original, but still updating it appropriately. But the first thing I should really mention is that this movie is once again another reboot to the series, ignoring all previous installments except for the original. Did they just feel that the first one was gold and the rest were all a load of shit? It's true that the original can be regarded as the best, but why no more continuity between the films? This is the 4th time in a row they did this. Once again, the plot revolves around the military who build Mechagodzilla to fight Godzilla. But this time, Mechagodzilla is built around the actual skeleton of the original Godzilla. Yeah, so the Godzilla in this movie is definitely the second of its kind. And the original Godzilla bones are now inside Mechagodzilla. So it's the new Godzilla fighting the old one. Once you're able to wrap your head around that, it gets even more crazy. There's actually traces of Godzilla's DNA in the bones, and somehow that causes a genetic memory that Mechagodzilla remembers that it was Godzilla and then goes on a rampage through the city. Now that's just mind-blowing. So most of the movie deals with the military's attempt to get Mechagodzilla under control. Oh, and I forgot to mention, they don't call it Mechagodzilla, they constantly refer to it as Kiru. What the hell, it's Mechagodzilla, that's what the title says. Kiru? What kind of dumb name is that? What did he just say? Godzilla sucks dick? They also tried to make Mechagodzilla more realistic by giving him a limited amount of fighting time before he runs out of power. They use planes to take him to his destination. I guess that saves him gas. Nothing's realistic to begin with, so what's the deal? Mechagodzilla has some great powers, the ability to freeze shit and then crush the ice. They try to use it on Godzilla, but it fails. He's also mounted with a super laser cannon that obliterates anything in front of it. It seems that's the only weapon that might stand a chance against Godzilla, but whenever they try to use it on him, something goes wrong. The effects are pretty good, and the monster battles are great. But this one leaves you wishing for a little more. It seemed that this one spent a lot of time setting up the story, reinventing Godzilla again, and concentrating on the humans' efforts to get Mechagodzilla working. All in all, not bad, but at least it had a direct sequel, coming next. Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. Godzilla Tokyo SOS is a direct sequel to the last movie, and that's great because the last movie was more like a setup to this one. It re-established Godzilla for the 4th time in a row and reinvented Mechagodzilla for the 3rd time total. But now, we're ready to rock and roll. Not only does it pit Godzilla against Mechagodzilla in their final battle, but it throws Mothra in the mix. Mothra is apparently upset that the original Godzilla bones were taken from the sea. Please refer back to my last review because I'm not explaining that one again. But anyway, why the hell does Mothra care about Godzilla's bones? But it doesn't seem to matter much anyway. She comes in and tries to stop Godzilla, but she gets her ass kicked. What do you expect? Soon enough, Mechagodzilla joins the action. Eventually, Mothra is defeated, but her twin babies hatch and they continue to fight for her, just like in the original Godzilla vs. Mothra. It's an all-out monster brawl. It's what you'd expect. Not much to say about this one, but just look at it. Has a lot of destruction, a lot of flashy effects, same old stuff, but it leaves you satisfied. Godzilla Final Wars. Welcome to the last day of Godzilla-Thon, and this one's a blast. All I can say is, wow. Toho really ended the series right. It was the 50th anniversary of Godzilla, and it was time to give him another rest. So basically, they just decided to go totally insane with this movie. For the most part, it's like a remake of Destroy All Monsters. Back then, that was a big deal to see so many of their famous monsters thrown together into one movie. But since there's been so many new monsters that fans have always suggested a remake, but to round up all the monsters to date. Well, our wish was finally granted, and it was worth the wait. To describe the plot would be like trying to explain quantum physics in 5 minutes. But basically, monsters appear all over the world. Anguirus attacks Shanghai, King Caesar attacks Okinawa, Kamacuras attacks Paris, the American Godzilla attacks Sydney, Australia, the Spider attacks Arizona, and Rodan attacks New York City. By the way, according to Toho, this is what goes on in New York City.
Yo, what's up? Oh, come on, put the gun down.
No, see, it's too late for that. This here and a hand cannon. I'll blow your ass all the way back to Jersey. Great! Go for it.
Yeah, guess that's about right. Also, Godzilla's son is discovered on Mount Fuji, but this never really amounts to much. It just sort of becomes a subplot. The smog monster also makes an appearance, but it's really brief. I still can't believe that they even include King Caesar. It seems they went out of their way to dig up any obscure villain from the Godzilla universe, but the only thing missing is Jet Jaguar. Even the sea monster Ebra makes an appearance. Mutant soldiers engage the monster on foot and actually take him down with handheld weapons. Pretty crazy. The mutant soldiers are able to jump around, sort of like a cross between The Matrix and a Kung Fu Wu-Tang movie. There's a lot of action scenes involving the humans fighting, and it's great. The first time I saw this, I was really taken back because I watch a Godzilla movie to see monsters fighting, not people. But now, I think it's pretty awesome because usually in a Godzilla movie, you get scenes where monsters are fighting and scenes where people are talking. So the trade-in is that instead you get scenes with monsters fighting and scenes with people fighting. So it's all fighting, you can't go wrong. Of course there's aliens involved. They come down in a spaceship that looks like Epcot's giant golf ball. They basically turn all the monsters loose to destroy the world. Resistance is futile? Like in Star Trek?
Resistance is futile.
They bring out Gigan, probably one of the greatest of Godzilla's enemies, and he hasn't been seen since the first series. So the humans free Godzilla from the ice to fight the monsters. So Godzilla's going around blasting the fuck out of the other monsters, almost like the killer in a slasher flick. Just walking around nice and slow, butchering everybody in his path. Nobody even hurts Godzilla. He's fucking invincible. Just one by one, bam! Just taking them all out. American Godzilla, watch him go. Oh, murdered. Just fucking murdered. He just destroys everything. And that's what we fucking like. There's also a team led by this guy with a mustache who reminds me of Sergeant Slaughter from G.I. Joe. He's a tough motherfucker. The whole thing is just crazy. I can't even do it justice. There's a scene with a swarm of alien ships going to battle like Star Wars. A pilot has to fly to the center of the mothership and take down the shields. There's kung fu fighting and monsters battling. It's all happening at the same time. A meteor comes down to Earth, revealing itself as Monster X. Yeah, the first new monster in a while. But maybe not. Anyway, the aliens repair Gigan, now with new weapons, and they send him to join the battle. But then Mothra shows up to help, and in the middle of all this, there's still all that kung fu shit going on. So Mothra gets killed, Gigan gets killed, and then it's just Godzilla against Monster X. But wait. Oh, here it comes. Oh yeah, it's Ghidorah. And how fitting is it that the last Godzilla movie puts him up against his most classic adversary? The whole thing is brilliant. If you're willing to let reality fly out the window and just sit back and enjoy a wild flick, then give this one a watch because it kicks ass. Now, instead of killing Godzilla this time, they just let him swim off into the ocean with his son. This pretty much tells us that they're just taking a rest and sometime they will return. Now, what's for the future of Godzilla? Well, we know for a fact that the giant monster movie genre is still going strong. Cloverfield took the idea and it did something a little different with it. This time, focusing more on the people rather than the monsters. It's also neat for us Western audiences to see a monster attack more recognizable places like New York City. This was a full 10 years after the American Godzilla attacked New York City. Now it seems Toho is already starting to bring Godzilla back. He just made a cameo in the film Always Sunset on 3rd Street 2. It's only a short dream scene, but like in Cloverfield, it focuses on the people more. Godzilla's only seen for a brief moment, and he's all CG. But it was pretty well done, and it was great to see him make a comeback so soon. And a new 40-minute Godzilla movie in 3D and IMAX is slated for release in 2009. It's only a step away, and my guess is that it won't be too much longer before Godzilla makes a full comeback. I hope he fights King Kong again, or Gamera. That would be awesome. Godzilla vs. King Kong vs. Gamera would have the fans line up around the globe. So, that's it. Godzilla-Thon is finally over.
No more! I'm sick of Godzilla!
I hope you enjoyed it and found it informative. If you're interested in seeing any of these movies but don't know where to begin, you'll have to judge for yourself, but I can at least give you my own recommendations. Here's my own top 10. Number 10, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Number 9, Godzilla vs. Destroyer. Number 8, Godzilla Tokyo SOS. Number 7, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, the original. Number 6, King Kong vs. Godzilla. Number 5, Godzilla vs. Mothra, the original. Number 4, Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All Out Attack. Number 3, Godzilla Final Wars. Number 2, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. Number 1, Godzilla, the original. That's it for this year's Cinemassacre's Monster Madness. Maybe next time I'll do more horror films because there's plenty that I didn't get to last year. So thanks for watching. See you next time. Now, Godzilla and Anguirus, well, they don't like each other. I don't know what it was, but I recall Godzilla saying something about Anguirus' mom, but I don't know. They just fucking hate each other's guts, and Anguirus is a worthy foe, but Godzilla just kicks his ass. There's an art to making people in rubber suits appear large, and they did a good job in the first movie by filming from low angles and with proper atmospheric haze and camera speed, but this one comes off a little cheaper and probably has the worst shot of Godzilla ever. An aerial view from a helicopter, and he isn't even moving. He looks just like my foot-tall Godzilla action figure. My favorite part is when Kong takes a tree and shoves it down Godzilla's throat. That's hilarious. Should have shoved it up his ass. Then there's this part where they look like two hand puppets. It's great. It's Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon. This one is considered by fans and critics to be one of the best of the series. The creature Mothra had already starred in her own movie, Mothra. She's basically a giant moth or a butterfly, but she's a good monster who only causes destruction when her twin fairies are in trouble. It may sound weird, but that's only because it is. In the US, the title was changed to Godzilla vs. The Thing. You mean that thing? Or this thing? Or that thing? Or do you mean Mothra? I think they were smoking crack. Now, throughout the film, Martians control the mind of a princess and use her voice to speak to the people of Earth and warn of the monster crisis. Meanwhile, there's assassins trying to kill the princess, so why couldn't the Martians choose somebody who's not a target? Godzilla and Rodan spend the whole movie fighting, further proof that Godzilla can't get along with anybody. This is my favorite part right here. Watch, it's the dick drop. Oh, that's gotta hurt. Also, when Rodan yanks on his tail, it's like his head Oh my god, what the hell is he doing? This victory dance is one of the most famous moments of the whole franchise because it has no purpose in the film and it's completely ridiculous. So, the people of Planet X have something else up their sleeves. Ghidorah was in their control all along. Using magnetic waves, they also take control of Godzilla and Rodan and unleash all three monsters on Earth. I guess don't ever help an alien because all they want to do is take over the world.
Of course! Knock it off!
Godzilla looks like the Cookie Monster, and he likes volleyball. This is pretty awkward. During the fight, he lets his son get hit in the face with a rock and drags the poor little guy by his tail. After the fight's over, he clobbers him and walks away. Doesn't even care about his newborn son. Worst parent ever. But then he comes back and gives him a little ride on his tail, so it's all good. There's another scene where he tries to teach his kid how to breathe fire, even threatening to hit him. Man, what a mean dad. But the poor little guy can only puff smoke rings. That is until Godzilla steps on his tail. Okay, wow. Godzilla's Revenge. This movie is the wet core of the smelly dog turd, and we're gonna take a bite right in. Oh, there's nothing more sad than a grown man all alone wallowing in his sorrows watching Godzilla's Revenge, let alone making a video about it.
Godzilla says that I should learn to fight my own battles, you know.
So he escapes the kidnappers, and then he proves his newfound courage by beating up the bullies. And I don't know which fight is stranger, the monsters jumping around and flying through the air, or this ridiculous LSD-induced strobing fight with the bullies. Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, also known as Godzilla vs. Hedorah, follows in the line of Godzilla's revenge, targeting it towards kids. Little kids. Little kids who get hopped up on sugar to the point that their brains operate on higher levels of existence and their supersensory nerves subject them to a fantasy world that exceeds that of an adult on the most powerful narcotics known to science. He's sure come a long way since he first menaced Tokyo, an icon of destruction, now a savior of the planet. But not in a cool superhero kind of way, in a, hey kids, be good to the earth kind of way. The moral lesson of the movie is don't pollute, or else there'll be some weird shit monster that looks like a cross between Oscar the Grouch and the Blob. He's made of crap, so it's like Godzilla's battling a giant turd. Godzilla fights by waving his arms and dancing around. Even the chapter on the DVD menu says something you don't see every day. I agree. Godzilla vs. Gigan, oh boy, this one just tips the crap scale. It's a shit fest that has to be seen and be believed.
I think it stinks.
When it was released in the US, they changed the title to Godzilla on Monster Island, even though only a few seconds of the movie actually takes place on Monster Island. That's like calling Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom Indiana Jones in Shanghai, but even that's being generous. When are they going to learn that planes can't kill giant monsters? It never worked before, so why would it work now? The monsters start talking.
Hey, Carmilla! What do you want? Something funny going on. You better jack. Oh, yeah. Hey, Aquila, come on. There's a lot of trouble ahead.
The two monsters fight like a tag team match. Definitely the highlight of the film. But its repeated use of stock footage wears old, and so does the Godzilla costume. It's been used in so many films that you can actually see it falling apart. Look at the arms. I can deal with that, but would it have been too much trouble to keep the famous Godzilla roar from fucking up? You gotta be joking, what happened? Sounds like somebody playing with a record, and if that's not enough, Godzilla bleeds. Come on, Angerus, don't step in the saw, you dumb shit. Ha ha! The poster shows Godzilla fighting Megalon on top of the World Trade Center, something that never happens in the movie. There's not even a single scene that takes place in New York City, so how the hell did they come up with that? Also, not to mention, it would be physically impossible given the size of the monsters. Sure, King Kong could do it, but Godzilla's taller than the building itself. But the one reason why this movie stands out from all the rest is because a jet jaguar, a flying robot that changes size. I don't even need to say any more. You look at him and just laugh. Then the best moment of all, a priceless gem of cinematic entertainment that defies any law of reality that could possibly exist. Everybody in the world needs to see this. Watch. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Before the rematch, we introduce a bonus monster, a lazy one I might add, because it only wakes up if you sing to it. Mechagodzilla just unloads all his firepower and turns Godzilla into a blood sprinkler and twists his head around till it comes off. Surprising, because his head seemed pretty flexible before. This is a great entry in the series, delightfully cheesy and enjoyable. Scientists find Godzilla's cells and combine them with that of a plant to create a giant plant monster which goes on a rampage. Well, then why'd you do that? You don't mix Godzilla cells with a plant unless you want trouble. Perhaps if they called it Godzilla vs. Little Shop of Horrors, it would have had more marquee value. In the first battle, Godzilla blows his head off and fucking fries that bastard. They replace the missing head with a robot one and equip it with all new weapons. And yes, this character is officially known as Mecha Ghidorah. There's a scene where Rodan flies over the Magic Kingdom in Disney World. Too bad he didn't stop off and take a shit all over Space Mountain. Mothra actually makes an appearance. You see, there's an explanation that somehow Godzilla cells got carried onto Mothra when she flew into space, and that the cells went into a black hole and mutated as Space Godzilla. Now, as ridiculous as it sounds, I'll accept that, but they offer another explanation, that the cells came from Biollante, a creature spawned from Godzilla cells and plant cells, and that after fighting Biollante, the cells drifted up into space. I've never heard a movie give two elaborate explanations to anything like that, when one was clearly enough. It begins with one of the most incredible title screens ever. That's awesome. Well, you remember how he was born from nuclear radiation? Well, his heart is a nuclear reactor and it's melting down. That's the actual explanation in the movie. I'm not kidding. The name of the monster, surprisingly, isn't Destroyer. It's Destroyer! Yeah, that's the official name. Destroyer! Destroyer! But what we got was something that didn't even fit the requirements. None of Godzilla's trademark characteristics were incorporated. They actually kill him with missiles. Yeah, they shoot him down. That's it. There's also some weird thing about Godzilla laying eggs, which hatch into velociraptors. Yeah, seriously, it's just like the raptors from Jurassic Park. Clearly, this movie owed more to Jurassic Park than it did to Godzilla. But the problem with this movie is that they called it Godzilla. In fact, Toho officially renamed the monster Zilla. They even make a reference to it in the movie Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All Out Attack. Early in the film, when they're discussing the history of Godzilla, they mention that in 1998 a monster attacked New York City. The Americans think it was Godzilla, but it really wasn't. And later, in Godzilla Final Wars, there's a brief cameo where Zilla fights Godzilla and basically gets annihilated with one single blast of his nuclear breath. Too bad Zilla didn't have nuclear breath. Bottom line, Godzilla 1998 should officially be renamed Zilla. It's not worthy of God, it's just Zilla. But then, in what seemed like retaliation, Toho countered back with a new movie that was basically what the American version should have been. It was like a can of air refresher after someone took a nasty shit. He's so big, he's actually able to swallow Godzilla, or at least partially devour him like a snake eating a rat. But uh-oh, that was a bad idea. Oh! It's when he leaps in the air and does a body slam. Look, there he goes! So, okay, this one is called Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All Out Attack. Just rolls off your tongue. Now, as one would expect from the title, Mothra and King Ghidorah are present, but there's also Baragon. Why did he get left out of the title? Was it too long for just one more? Bottom line, nobody gives a shit about Baragon. There's also a monster from the Gamera series called Barugan that shoots rainbows out its back. That's Baragon and Barugan. Get it right. They're two totally, completely different things. They just happen to look almost identical and have basically the same name. Man, you don't fuck with Godzilla. He takes on everybody. Boom! 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 Once again, the plot revolves around the military who build Mechagodzilla to fight Godzilla. But this time, Mechagodzilla is built around the actual skeleton of the original Godzilla. Yeah, so the Godzilla in this movie is definitely the second of its kind. And the original Godzilla bones are now inside Mechagodzilla. So it's the new Godzilla fighting the old one. Once you're able to wrap your head around that, it gets even more crazy. There's actually traces of Godzilla's DNA in the bones, and somehow that causes a genetic memory that Mechagodzilla remembers that it was Godzilla and then goes on a rampage through the city. Now that's just mind-blowing. By the way, according to Toho, this is what goes on in New York City.
Yo, what's up?
Oh, come on, put the gun down.
No, see, it's too late for that. This here in a hand cannon. I'll blow your ass all the way back to Jersey. Great! Go for it.
Yeah, guess that's about right. The first time I saw this, I was really taken back because I watch a Godzilla movie to see monsters fighting, not people. But now, I think it's pretty awesome because usually in a Godzilla movie, you get scenes where monsters are fighting and scenes where people are talking. So, the trade-in is that instead, you get scenes with monsters fighting and scenes with people fighting. So, it's all fighting, you can't go wrong. Of course, there's aliens involved. They come down in a spaceship that looks like Epcot's giant golf ball. They basically turn all the monsters loose to destroy the world. Anyway, the aliens repair Gigan, now with new weapons, and they send him to join the battle. But then Mothra shows up to help, and in the middle of all this, there's still all that kung fu shit going on. So Mothra gets killed, Gigan gets killed, and then it's just Godzilla against Monster X. But wait. Oh, here it comes. Oh yeah, it's Ghidorah. And how fitting is it that the last Godzilla movie puts him up against his most classic adversary? It's Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, Godzilla-Thon.